Here are all the topics covered in the U. It was traditionally argued that the US party system means very little in practice. The parties lacked clear ideological substance, and organisationally they played second fiddle to individual candidates, special interest groups, and wealthy donors. As late as 1972, in response to an opinion poll, "Are there any important differences in what the two parties stand for?" 44% of Americans said no, only just behind 46% that answered yes. In the 21st century, no one could remotely accuse the two main parties of being similar in ideology and values, but that is not necessarily to say that US parties are themselves alive and well. The phrase "the party's over" is probably one of the most easily misunderstood in US politics. The title of an important work by David Broder, published in 1972, it did not foretell or warn of the demise of US political parties. The main point it sought to make was that the party system was not working effectively and had contributed to a dysfunctionality in US politics. David Broder's thesis is a key theory to know in regards to the theories of party decline. He was writing during the Vietnam War and before the Watergate crisis, and mainly made observations of party decline. Firstly, he argues that parties had largely abdicated their role in formulating policy and positions in the areas of foreign policy, and too much had been left to experts. He said that elections are held and party control of the presidency shifts, but the technicians and experts, the Walt Rostos and the Henry Kissingers, never seemed to lose their grip on foreign policy machinery. Secondly, the parties needed to be reinvigorated and their congressional leadership given greater powers, with less emphasis on seniority. He says that leadership ought to be held accountable for bringing in legislation to which the party is committed to a floor vote in orderly and timely fashion, with adequate opportunity for debate and particularly for consideration of the opposition party alternatives. Broder also argues for the end of the Senate filibuster and the Electoral College to better enable the elected to be governed and the direct will of the people to be reflected in the presidential election. Despite focusing on party decline, Broder was aware of the dangers of ignoring party renewal when he warned that the power might otherwise become centralized in the White House, with a president who exploits skillfully the arts of demagoguery, who uses the whole country as his political background, and does not mind turning into the embodiment of a personal government. Finally, Broder also argues for restrictions on campaign finance and for it to be mostly channeled through party campaign committees and not individual candidates, alongside a reduction in the number of directly elected officers, especially at state and local level. Now we're going to look at the evidence of party decline. There is lots of evidence of this. For example, this can be seen in the growth of split ticket voting up until the 1980s, a rise in primaries with a reduced control of the party machine in candidate selection. Party leaders in Congress and even presidents often struggled to persuade legislators to toe the party line. There is a growth of candidate-centered campaigning. Parties are rarely mentioned in ads or even in literature. And there is also a rise of pressure groups as an alternative focus for political participation. There are many theories as to why parties have declined. Firstly, we have candidate selection. The parties have lost control over presidential candidate selection. Until the late 1960s, presidential candidates were largely selected by party bosses in smoke-filled rooms. Now they are chosen by ordinary voters in presidential primaries, suggesting a significant blow for party control. There is also communication with voters. Parties have lost their traditional function as the communicator between politicians and the voters, for example, through party-organised functions such as question and answer sessions. This is because today politicians communicate their messages through TV and voters speak back through opinion polls. Another theory is the emergence of movements. The emergence of the Tea Party and Occupy movements during the 2000s to 2010s showed that many Americans are now more prone to join a movement rather than a traditional party. These movements seek to exert political influence over the Republican and Democratic parties. For example, the Tea Party movement managed to get its preferred candidates chosen in certain congressional races over the wishes of the Republican Party leadership, suggesting another way in which there has been a decline in political parties. In 2016, Donald Trump talked of his campaign as a movement rather than an activity of the Republican Party. He was able to succeed despite vocal opposition from many in the Republican Party hierarchy, for example, in the 2012 presidential candidate Mitt Romney and both previous Bush presidents. It could also be said about Bernie Sanders forming a movement during the Democratic primaries. Now we're going to look at evidence of party renewal. There is evidence that the decline in split ticket voting in recent years is on a decrease. It has had a record low in 2016. Democrats have unelected superdelegates comprising of 20% of the delegates at their national nominating convention. There is also growing party unity and partisanship in both congressional votes generally and Senate confirmation votes. There is also an emergence of much more coherent policy platforms among both parties, and the strong influence of many pressure groups on particular parties, for example the NRA and the Republicans. Let's look at the theories of party renewal. Theories of party decline have been greatly exaggerated. Parties might be less important than they used to be, but they still play a significant role in US politics. For example, the death of the Republican Party was reported after the Watergate affair and Nixon's resignation in 1974, with his term being completed by Gerald Ford. However, the Democrats only held the White House for one term, before a new Republican president was in the White House. Another example is the death of the Democratic Party was reported following a left-wing shift in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. However, it was resurrected by the new Democrat model of the Clinton-Gore in 1992. Furthermore, in reality, the two major parties controlled the White House, Congress, and the vast majority of state governorships throughout the whole of the 20th century. Another theory of party renewal is nationalization of campaigns. Party renewal has been seen in the move towards nationalizing electoral campaigns. For example, this was especially true in the 1994 midterms. The Republicans campaigned around a 10-point policy program called the Contract with America, created by Congressman Newt Gingrich. It was supported by nearly all Republican House candidates and promised that under a Republican-controlled Congress, votes would be held within 100 days of Congress on the 10 policy issues of interest. Another example is in 2006, where Democrats 6-06 for the midterms, leading them to retaking control of both houses of Congress after 12 years in the minority. We have also seen increased partisanship in Congress. A final pointer towards party renewal comes from increased levels of partisanship in Congress. If parties were declining in importance, then a decline in partisanship should be expected. If parties no longer matter, then why should their members continually disagree? But actually, we've seen that partisanship has increased significantly in Congress over the last 20 years.